All right. Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited for today's panel discussion. Again, like the introduction said, I'm Shannon. Hi, I work at WM, and I also have the opportunity to participate in a number of ReMA's different technical divisions and committees, et cetera. So really looking forward to this presentation today where, I think a lot of you may know that historically ReMA has been very heavily focused on metals recycling. And as topics like extended producer responsibility and product labeling, as those become hotter and hotter topics within state legislatures and within our federal legislature, it's more and more of a topic that we need to focus on here at ReMA. So I think today's presentation will, it's a presentation and a conversation. I think will be really enlightening, and then we obviously look forward to questions from you all. Okay, you guys saw that? Okay, this is from like the board slides, but just in case there's an emergency, we do have an evacuation plan, okay, because safety first. All right, okie dokie. So our speakers, let me pull up my notes. I saw somebody do this yesterday and I was like, that's a great idea. Just use my phone. All right. So first up, we're going to go in alphabetical order. So first up is Paul Nowak, the executive director of GreenBlue. He brings 30 plus years of experience to the table through a variety of roles across the supply chain, including vice president of sustainability at Quad, general manager of manufacturing, senior director of client experience, and vice president of enterprise solutions for brands. Nowak's passion for sustainability and embodiment of GreenBlue's mission are demonstrated through his career accomplishments, including the creation of the first Quad Sustainable Packaging Public Report, the annual Client Sustainability Symposium, and the development of the Quad Community Education Program. During his career, Nowak has highlighted the importance of diversity and inclusion in the industry by serving as a diversity, equity, and inclusion leader, founding the first Quad Business Resource Group for LGBTQIA+ teammates. So welcome, Paul. Great. Glad to have you here. And then next up is Jessica Weninger. She serves as the Director of Sustainability at Reynolds Consumer Products, bringing a strong background in new product development, materials engineering, and sustainable household products that simplify daily life. During her 13 years with Reynolds, she has taken on multiple positions in innovation and product development, advancing both technical solutions and environmental outcomes throughout the company's offerings. In her current role, Jessica leads initiatives to drive environmental responsibility and sustainable practices across the organization, working cross-functionally to align innovation, operations, and compliance objectives. She holds a master's degree in product design and development management from Northwestern University and a master's degree in material science and engineering from the University of Illinois. So welcome, Jessica. All right. So first up, before we get to our speakers, we just wanted to kind of level set and talk a little bit about a really interesting and important topic, ReMA's ISRI specifications. So, there we go. All right. So preface, I might just read this. Sorry, but the ReMA's ISRI specifications are intended to assist members in buying and selling of their materials and products. These specifications provide common language for describing the quality and composition of recycled metals, paper, plastics, glass, and electronics. They are internationally recognized and used by buyers and sellers worldwide. Parties to a transaction may specify particular variations or additions to these specifications suited to their needs. Any deviation from these specifications, however, should be mutually agreed upon and documented in writing. And then ReMA maintains an arbitration service to help members settle differences between themselves or with non-members. Guidelines for metal transactions contain supplementary information to support business transactions. We recommend reviewing these guidelines alongside the specifications. And these are public. So the most current version of the ReMA's ISRI specifications is at isrispecs.org. So I know that that's a lot to read, and sorry, but it's really, really important that, because I know that just from talking with folks within the ReMA sphere, the specifications sort of mean one thing to us that are buying and selling bales of material, or us that operate material recovery facilities, and we're looking at the inbound specs. Like, we see them more as guidelines. However, outside of, our ReMA family, there's other groups like GreenBlue that look at the specifications, and it's an opportunity to kind of point to, like, hey, this is an internationally recognized industry standard. So there's been recent revisions. I won't go through all of this, but they're constantly being revised. Anybody from the general public, I think, can submit a petition to revise the ReMA specifications. And then there's a coordinated process that goes through the ReMA's technical divisions, or excuse me, I keep calling them technical divisions. I think that's SWANA. Like the commodity divisions, the ReMA specifications go through that. That goes through a board vote. There's public comment before the board vote, public comment after the board vote. So it's a very thorough process. And then these are just visual flourishes. I know that you can't read them. But again, this information is publicly available. So this just kind of sets the stage for part of the conversation that we're going to have in just a few moments is there are more and more laws that are kind of looking at, like, how are products labeled? How do we determine what is recyclable, what's not recyclable? And these specifications are out there, and so people are going to use them as references. And so I think it's just really important that we're all on the same page about that. So, all right. Okay, so I will turn it over to Paul. Oh, yeah, you need the clicker.
Thank you. There's no way I can sit for an hour, so you're going to have to watch me move around a little bit. So again, Paul Nowak with GreenBlue. If you haven't heard of GreenBlue, GreenBlue is a nonprofit, and we run programs which most of you probably have heard of. So the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, or SPC, the How to Recycle label, which we're going to double click pretty hard on today, or H2R, things like the RMS, the Recycled Material Standards. All of these are programs that are based on membership participation, and they're voluntary. So just a little bit deeper into each one of those. So the SPC has a group of members that come together and they take on problem statements in the sustainable packaging space. So that could go from recyclability, store drop-off, looking at reuse, compostables. And it's really the idea that you bring a group together that they're going to be smarter and stronger together through their resources, and looking at circularity and having different groups of stakeholders at the table. So I'm sure a bunch of you are in groups where you're like, I wish someone would have talked to me before they made this decision. Why wasn't I at the table for that? And a retailer does something, or one of your partners that creates a material does something. Our goal here is to have all those voices together so that we can put best practice documents out into the world. How to Recycle is the voluntary on-pack label for disposal, and we'll talk about that in a second. And RMS is the Recycled Material Standard. This is one of our newer programs. And think of it really as a chain of custody for materials. So as we get more into the end market discussion and what do real end markets look like, part of that is having to prove it, not just talking about it in concept. So having a standard where you could actually audit to it is where the RMS was built, and it came again out of our membership. So this is the slide everyone has to see, and it's like, oh, this guy really likes himself. He's going to show all these logos. I show this more that when we get deeper, I want you to understand who's at the table with us. And we can't fit everyone on the slide. It's a good problem to have. But 1,400 plus members are weighing in on these discussions. And we just heard about the specifications for ReMA. Part of the reason we're here is one of the things we weigh in on is, what does good data look like? And what do good standards look like for specifications? In a world where you think most of those exist, maybe most of you know they don't. We have to continue to get better at it. So having everyone at the table and working with ReMA has been really important to GreenBlue to move this topic forward. The way we think about it at GreenBlue through SPC and How to Recycle is theory of change. So what we're doing is bringing together groups to collaborate who are always smarter than me. You're going to hear me for an hour, so you're going to know that by the end, like, we're all smarter than this guy. So these people come together and they then coalesce around a problem statement to move forward. So the example I always like to give at SPC, the how to recycle label. So show of hands, who has seen or knows the how to recycle label? Okay, so good. That's good penetration for our marketing team. I'll send them a nice note after this. So think about this. 12 plus years ago, there was not a how to recycle label. And a bunch of members came together at SPC and said, isn't it crazy we are not telling residents how to dispose of something? So SPC did not do this. The groups came together in a theory of change. Now, it could have died. No one could have used it. Today, we have 800 plus brands between the U.S. and Canada using a voluntary label. So it's not mandated at this time. It is not mandated that you have to label. So that's really, I don't like to just say like, here's how it works. I like to give you a live example. So over 12 years, a program that came out of SPC now is become the de facto of what you're seeing on packaging in the U.S. and Canada. And we do that through our collaborative programs. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I don't want this to be a GreenBlue SPC sales pitch, but it's important for you to remember all these other programs are happening, and most of them in some way overlap with other groups like ReMA, like the Carton Council, like different groups that we're working with, like APR, if you know APR. So a lot of these things are overlapping. We're material neutral, so we tend to be over the whole scope where other groups are in a very specific circle. Okay, so extended producer responsibility. Yes, you can use your other hand this time. Hopefully you put your deodorant on. Who knows what EPR is? Okay. So we have a pretty rich group. We wanted to start with this because as we go deeper, we're going to take you level by level into it for our discussion today. So extended producer responsibility, many of you know. Here's the fun map. You've probably seen different versions of it. Maybe this is the first time, so get your phones out if you want to. And so at first, when I was going to SPC meetings 5-6 years ago, we had people saying, please don't ever talk about EPR from the stage. We don't want to hear about it. We hope it never happens. This is where we're at. Fast forward in the year of our Lord 2026, we now have 7 states that have passed this. We have first bills coming out of Oregon last year where you're seeing invoices that the basics are producers are being asked to play a part in paying for the systems needed to take responsibility for specifically packaging in this case. So that has changed many of the definitions and how producers start to look at decisions around packaging. And specifically for the ReMA audience, I think it's important to know not only from a residential standpoint, but from just a material standpoint that could prove to show shifts in where packaging leads and other materials lead. We don't fully know yet, but things like this start to drive home why maybe we think that could be true. So in a case where you start to look at materials, we're material agnostic at GreenBlue. That does not mean that EPR policy is material agnostic. So this is me reading a headline, not telling you what I think. Here are, as you start to look at numbers and you see where the numbers are hitting based on 2 of the states. California is the big one yet to come that we're modeling now. You start to see some patterns, right? You start to see where that's important. Now, if you're in a major CPG, like we have on stage, you have to start thinking about this and modeling it long term for what that's going to mean. So you might have your CFO for the first time ever saying, what is this? Like, we have a new line item in our P&L that we never had before, and having to deal with that. Think of that change. These are people financially in financial systems for good reason. They repeat every week, every month, every quarter. They have a system. It turns a certain way. They know their budgets. They're very tight. Now you're saying, I can't fully tell you what number you're going to have. They still have to model it. So that's why this has become such a hot button issue in the industry. And this is just one of the things that SPC puts out. And I talked earlier about having a bunch of stakeholders. Our members said, can you give us some tools so we can start to go into meetings at our organizations and show like what this might look like? And so you start to see that the material agnostic piece Our organization can be material agnostic. You could be material agnostic. That doesn't mean that the states will be. And so you have to understand the landscape that you're in today. And if you didn't have enough charts because you were right before lunch and you wanted to see more, we'll give you a couple more. Really just driving home the point that if this isn't something that's in your world today, it might be in the future, but it might be because you see some material shift in the waste streams in a way that you're like, why are we getting less of this and more of this? Because the whole waste stream could react to this. Part of the EPR fees are to set up infrastructures in states to take more of certain materials. That's not proven yet, so we have to see it actually prove out that that's what will happen. But at its core, if you see like Oregon is already starting to create new municipal drop-offs that didn't exist before, specifically for some hard to recycle non-curbside materials, that's something you want to really think about. The QR code here, if you really want to nerd out or if you have a long flight you need to sleep, you can scan that and then go deep dive into eco-modulation. Think of eco-modulation as a bonus. So if you're doing the right things, not only do you have these fees at a state level, they might say, if you've moved to more recyclable materials, if you have a label on pack in the future, if you're looking at changing and design features that help, you can get a bonus to put against your fees that would, in theory, lower your fees. We're still seeing how all that plays out. Most of it is conceptual right now, but as we go deeper into it, you will see brands, retailers, everyone is looking at this. Back to what I mentioned earlier about budget. As they look at their budget, they have to figure this out when they're modeling for the future. So instead of just being the boogeyman, it's good to look at dates. Like, what does that mean? Where are we happening? I heard about this. There's hard dates. These are policies and laws that have been passed. So it's written in. It's not a debate. That does not mean that there's not mechanisms to pause these. That does not mean that there won't be lawsuits that come into play that could pause parts of them. I am not a lawyer, so I tell everyone, if you have a legal team, that's who you should ask your questions to. What I will say is follow the best practices of what's being laid out by these policies that fit your business, because there's lots of good things in there already you probably should be looking at as best practice, and have a short-term, medium-term, long-term plan that allows you to be agile as we see things change. But I remember when we were first talking about this, 2027 seems really far away. It doesn't seem so far away anymore. October of 2026, which is a big date out of California, not very far away anymore. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that you're seeing the temperature slowly turn up. And now it's not even slow. It's kind of like we're just going to flip the switch and the flames are higher. Mm-hmm. So people are really looking at what this is going to look like. So the other piece of the puzzle that I don't think was necessarily meant to be, and we talked earlier about like what the specification meant, right, Shannon? Like, did we mean for the ISRI ReMA spec to be used a certain way? No. Is it being used that way? Yes. If it's a duck and it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, people are going to call it a duck. So similarly to recyclability, you're seeing a definition shift in recyclability. So again, we're talking about residential, consumer facing, and things that are governed now at times by state law. Mm-hmm. In the past, it was FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. Green guides, again, raise hands. People know what the green guides are. Getting less for that than EPR, so we'll go a little deeper. Green guides, FTC, when you see these buckets, the legal use of the term recyclable at the federal level has a definition. Mm-hmm. And so what How to Recycle did when that group of stakeholders came together at SPC and said, we should have an on-pack label, they didn't make that up. They went to the FTC guide. They read it. It's a little loose. Is that an understatement? Okay, we're getting some laughs for that. There's one data point in it that states 60% access. Other than that, it's interpretation. I'm a positive guy. Let's interpret it. So what How to Recycle did is started to come up with the buckets you see here: collection, sortation, reprocessing, and markets. Those are all directly pulled from language of the green guides. what we added at How to Recycle is applicable law. Thank God we did, because now we have state laws that are starting to weigh in on what some of these definitions mean. So when I talk about the changing definition of recyclable, what you could legally say was recyclable, and remember I talked about eco-modulation earlier? So for an EPR fee, if something's recyclable, your fees could be less or you could get a bonus. You see those dots are starting to connect now. If you believed something was recyclable and you were hoping to get an eco-modulation bonus, and then the definition of recyclability changes, that's a tough pill to swallow. You're working a certain way towards something and figuring it out. So what is really changing? Here's one of the versions of what's been changing. So SB 343, if those people haven't heard of it, again, this is not, I am reading a headline today. This is not my opinion. This is what I'm putting on the screen. You could go Google it, use your tool of choice. And it's talking about, here's what now we consider recyclable. And the definition is changing. So in the past, there was technical recyclability, which was not under the FTC green guides, but it meant you did all your research, you worked with your reclaimers, you worked with your MRFs, you worked with your processors, and they said this could be recycled. And maybe we want to, depending on the region and if it's dirty or not. Like there's lots of rules to that, but it could be technically. Now it's becoming like, but is it? Is it being recycled? So you see California putting more definition to that. So when a brand or a retailer then has to define, and so back to EPR, I know you're all following around, I see you going back and forth, that's good. Back to EPR, when you have to define it, that means you're reporting to a state. You're saying, this is the type of packaging I sold and this is where it is. And now you're starting to say, I thought these were going to be in the recyclability bucket, but based on number 2, where you have your sortation numbers, collectively serving at least 60% of statewide recycling programs. Well, who's got that data point? Like, how are we working through that? So all of this is what we're figuring out. I call it the messy middle. At drinks, I hear it called something very different. We're not going to say that on stage today because they might be taping, but there's a lot going on in this space. So what is being used in California and every state, it has, based on state rights, every state can do this slightly differently. They have material characteristics, and legally, by law, they have to post this. They get a certain amount of time that they get to update it. And you're starting to see definitions that we use. And I swear I'm going to land the plane on this and bring it back to those ReMA specs. You're like, God, don't give this guy a mic. But as we go through this, it will all connect. So if you start to have a state saying, here's the definitions, the state doesn't have their own specs for a bale. So who are they going to look at? Well, some leaders in the industry like ReMA or Carton Council are working with APR. APR is written in to the California and the Cal Recycle law. Use the APR standard. Currently, How to Recycle uses the ISRI standard, which is the ReMA standard. Can we call it both, Robin? Can we call it both? Okay, thank you. So we can call it both. So that standard, even though it wasn't meant to be used for that, in the void of not having something, you have to use something. And it turns out an AG in litigation doesn't care what you call it. They're still going to ask you what you used. So just to show kind of where we are at, the percents on the right that will end up eventually becoming the new standard are what are posted by California to say, here's the actual rates for these materials residentially. So paperboard, I'm an old paperboard guy. I'm just an old guy, but I also worked in paperboard for a long time. That's disgusting to me. A 30% rate for paperboard? Like, those are the rates we're seeing. And now the definition isn't only about, is there access and is it being sorted? But the definition starts to shift is, does this new table really show it at a certain level that you can call it recyclable? Part of being able to call it recyclable goes back to the specifications and the bale specs and what we're looking at. So how does this impact you? We do have an EPR tool here if you want to go further into the state laws. Part of is that you can dig into that further. My battery might be dead.
No. Uh-oh.
Not my personal battery, the clicker battery. There we go. Did it do like 3? Okay. So that's the policy roundup. So one of the collaborators we have at SPC is you can just sit in and listen. You don't have to be an expert on policy. They'll walk you through it state by state. We have the states come in and speak about it. This is a great way. Many teams at our members didn't have anyone assigned to this. This wasn't a role in a company, so they needed help in that. Some of the larger organizations have their own roles. So let's talk about the label evolution. So what about materials that don't fit in curbside? So if you're fast readers and you were reading the slides earlier, it talked about residential and curbside. There's a lot of flexible materials that currently are not considered available for curbside recycling. And so many of those in the next few years, if there's not a different way to collect them, would fall off of the list of being considered recyclable, which takes you back to that question of fees and what fee would you pay. If those who follow the packaging industry, flexible films have had the largest growth of any type of packaging in the last 20 plus years, continues to grow. So as you start to see what we're working on here, our members came to us and said, can you expand store drop-off? Is that one avenue for this? And then can you also look at expanding a label for municipal drop-off and different drop-off like subscription-based drop-off? Because we realize you will not get curbside across a whole state, let alone nationally, in 2 years, right? That lift is very difficult. So what are the different avenues we can take with that? So the initial label on the left used to be our old store drop-off label. Back to policy. One of the other things in California is the chasing arrows being seen as greenwashing and really removing them. I will tell you, every data point we have says the consumer understands chasing arrows faster than anything else. Unfortunately, when you have a law that's passed a certain way, we have to respond to it. We comply to the law. We do not lobby. So you see the new label there. That's a bin that makes it compliant because we want to make sure that we're gaining as many of these materials as possible. And what we see is this future of the label where it will be a scannable label that will go to a database. So it's really solving for where these things will go. So we talked through a lot of curbside. And what will these new ones be? We would like one label for one ring to rule them all for the nerds in the room, but one label that is store drop-off, municipal drop-off, and subscription, all in one label, takes up a smaller amount of space, is scannable to a database that says, is it in your area? And then we feel that will fit the requirements, show that to the states and say, does this work? At least to get an extension on those materials so that those materials aren't deemed non-recyclable. So that could be what it starts to look like. And that is my section. So that was your level set on EPR. And I'm going to hand it over. Are you ready to go?
Ready. Let's do it.
Now we're going to hear from a brand perspective.
All right. Thanks, everybody. All right. So first of all, thank you, ReMA, for the invitation. Happy to be here. And thanks to all of you for showing up during what could be, I guess, the lunch hour. I don't have a lot of charts and graphs in my slides, but I do have some food photography. So apologies in advance for that. Just a little bit, I guess, first about myself. I am a materials engineer by background. I started my career in microelectronics, another industry that had been impacted by extended producer responsibility. But as a materials engineer, you're kind of trained more on process to get a certain set of properties and structure and performance of a material. You don't think a lot necessarily about where those materials are coming from, the impact of extracting those natural resources and turning into materials. And you don't think necessarily about the end of life, which is an important consideration, something I learned as I started my career in microelectronics, working on lead-free solders, halogen-free fluxes. The end of life of microelectronics at that time was not necessarily responsibly managed, and there was a need for policy to come in and facilitate some more responsible handling of those hazardous materials.
that kind of sparked my interest in materials and product design. So I shifted into the packaging industry where I worked on innovation. I started at Reynolds in new product development innovation. And, of course, end of life is a very important consideration at a company where our entire portfolio is single-use products. So that life cycle is very short. And as a product or materials designer, we had to think very carefully about what sort of positive end-of-life scenarios could we create for these products, whether that's recyclability, composting, anything but landfill. We want to keep those valuable materials in circulation as long as we can. So a little bit about Reynolds. So we, like I said, we make a variety of single-use products. Most of you, I expect, probably have some of our products in your pantry or your cabinets. We have, of course, the Reynolds brand, aluminum foil, as well as Hefty brand, waste products and food storage products. We also do some private label manufacturing. So maybe you might not know that our products are in your home, but if you have some certain store brands, they might be there as well. We also, I guess, can trace some of our history back to Reynolds Metals, which was, I think, an early adopter of recycling practices. They collected aluminum cans and did buybacks for foil back in the 60s before, I think, sustainability was cool. So I am, continually inspired by that legacy as I think about my current role in sustainability and how I can work with our product innovation teams to try to, make our products more sustainable and more compatible with recycling or compostable end-of-life scenarios. So a little bit more detail about some of our business units. Of course, Reynolds Cooking and Baking, that's the Reynolds wrap that I think all of us know us for, as well as single-use bakeware, some of your heavier gauge, catering trays, pie plates, casserole dishes, that kind of thing. Of course, also wax paper, parchment paper, muffin paper. So we cover a wide variety of materials. So I have to think about, a lot of different types of categories within the context of EPR and all of that. Additional business unit, of course, Hefty Waste. These are specifically designed for landfill. So, we certainly, I guess, appreciate the value that those products give to consumers and facilitating, clean transfer of, our waste to landfill. But, that's, I guess, the one exception where we aren't trying to get outside a landfill scenario that has a very specific purpose. Another business unit, Hefty Storage. So this is, a flexible film, polyethylene. We do work with other trade associations. We've done the APR testing to show that our slider bags are compatible with the store drop-off system. So most people, I think, probably associate store drop-off with your shopping bags, but all types of polyethylene products are compatible in that stream. So our slider bags are one of those. If it's clean and dry, of course, you can take that back to the store and recover them. And our last business unit, Hefty Tableware. This is the fun stuff like the party cups. Also cutlery, foam, molded fiber, paper plates, another, wide variety of materials. So given the, I think, variety and diversity of materials and products, definitely keeps us busy in terms of thinking about EPR and how some of those fees impact, our future pipeline, as well as, of course, the labeling piece. We are longtime users of the How to Recycle label since 2014. So we've gone through the whole evolution of, products being upgraded or downgraded or this new label redesign. I'm going to dive into a couple specific examples of how EPR and labeling requirements impact some of our products. Our, Reynolds wrap, we do use recycled content in all of our foil production, but this specific SKU, we guarantee 100% of the foil is recycled, cast in our, mill in Arkansas. We do purchase a lot of recycled aluminum to feed our production there. And of course, we also package it in recycled content packaging. So the carton is made with recycled fiber and is recyclable. And the paper core is also made with recycled fiber. And I think the paper core is an interesting example of it's kind of fallen into a gray area with the changes in recyclability labeling. So if we look at California SB 54, it has I had to take a note here of what specific material category it falls under. Under SB 54, the paper core at the middle of your foil roll is craft paper, all forms with a plastic component, because the glue, according to the state of California, is a synthetic and therefore is considered a plastic component. So it's not just a paper roll, it's paper with plastic in the state of California. So that includes, as an example, shipping tubes. However, with SB 343, this paper core falls under folded paper cartons and other paperboard packaging. Examples include paper-based tubes and cores, including paper towel and toilet paper tubes. It does not mention foil tubes, unfortunately. So there's a little bit of a gap. Is this considered recyclable or not? It's a gray area. We don't have data that we can point to, unfortunately, to make that substantiation that this is a recyclable product. I think to the industry, folks I've talked to, they're like, yes, absolutely. We want these paper cores. We want that fiber. It's valuable. But at the same time, we're sort of unable to fully substantiate it. And so, understandably, the How to Recycle folks, they're hewing very close to, okay, it's toilet paper tubes and paper towel tubes. Anything other than that, bring some data, bring some substantiation. And for things that have been sort of taken for granted as a recycled material, we got to fill in some of that missing information. So that's, just one sort of situation that we're trying to navigate through in all this changing legislation. Another thing I wanted to mention on this, we do use, like I said, the How to Recycle label to provide instructions to consumers about where to recycle the foil, or can they recycle the foil and packaging. We do use the QR code, so the How to Recycle Plus uses a QR code so that consumers can check if foil is accepted in their local community for recycling. Foil, unfortunately, falls below that 60% threshold that the green guides tell us is necessary to make a widely recyclable claim. So we have to, add that check locally. The QR code makes it easier for the consumer to do that check locally step, and find out if they're in the roughly 40% of communities in the U.S. that accept foil in their recycling programs. I guess an additional comment about foil, it's a valuable material, and I think it's unfortunate that so few communities do accept it in their programs. I appreciate, there's certain challenges with that, but I think they are overcomable. With, I guess using some EPA data, put some numbers behind this. Everybody talks about UBCs when they talk about aluminum recycling, at least in a residential context, right? Looking at EPA data, there's 530,000 tons of UBCs that are landfilled. So yeah, we're missing a lot, unfortunately. But at the same hand, 470,000 tons of foil closures and other types of aluminum cans are also being landfilled. So while foil and other non-UBC aluminum packaging formats are a smaller part of the, I guess, production of these types of materials, they're captured at a much lower rate. And so a lot more of it is going to landfill. So in terms of what all is being landfilled in the world of aluminum packaging, 530 versus 470 is pretty close. It's a lot of aluminum. I think there's a huge opportunity there to capture more of this material. And where is that being lost? Of course, with foil, one of the major issues is access, not having access in a lot of communities. And the other piece where a lot of it get lost is to the consumer. And recycling instructions are confusing. I have to look at a QR code. I have to look at my local recycling instructions. It'd be great if we could simplify this for the consumer and just say all metal packaging goes in the bin. Because I think inherently, metals are very, very recyclable, right? Infinitely recyclable, some might say. So why are we not collecting more of this? I think there's definitely some opportunity to preserve some of the value because, as I say here, it's only 5% of the energy needed to recycle aluminum versus making more aluminum. So it's a shame that so much of this material is going into landfills. That's my soapbox on that slide. So moving from metals to plastics, the other example I wanted to highlight is our Party Perfect printed cups. So this is a cup that we make in North Carolina with recycled content. So this particular SKU is 100% recycled content from Bottle Flake. And we implemented a few things to try to make this as circular as possible for a single-use product. Starts with using recycled content. Additionally, we specifically choose inks for that print pattern that are recycle friendly. They're designed to be able to wash off in recovery systems. We didn't have to choose that sort of ink. It's slightly more expensive to do so, but we deliberately made that choice to preserve the material value so that this can be, nice, clean, clear PET flake if it's recovered in a recycling system. Again, we also use the how to recycle label on this product as well, with the QR code so that folks can see if they can recycle a PET thermoform, I think this would be referred to as, in their communities. And additionally, the bag itself, another opportunity for store drop-off recovery. It's a polyethylene bag. It's, nothing fancy, not any multi-layer or anything like that. So this can also be recovered in, store drop-off. And we are also supporters or members of the Flexible Film Recycling Alliance under the Plastics Industry Association. So, we work with a number of trade associations and groups to try to advance circularity where we can for our products. Let's see. Come on. Okay, so yeah, that's just a few examples of sort of bring to life sort of how EPR impacts our products and categories. We're, I think, in a unique position in that a lot of our packaging is impacted by PR, but also the products themselves. And we have to navigate, the differing definitions of what is considered a covered material. Not all of our products are covered materials in every state. It's slightly different definitions of how they define packaging, how they define a food service or food service-like product implicates some of our products under EPR. We also have a variety of materials. So this is, a snapshot of what our product portfolio looks like today between now in 2032, when states like California are requiring 100% of products like these to be recyclable, compostable, or usable, this is going to look different. And going back to the fee schedule or some of the fee rates that Paul shared, those are very significant numbers, on the same level as the cost of the materials themselves. So to add that to the cost of these products, it's going to shift. We're going to make very different decisions about the sort of materials we use, the sorts of products that we put into market. So, 10 years from now, this is going to be a very different probably lineup of products and materials. Additional comment, I think, on some of the complexity, as a producer reporting into each state, they have different material categories that don't necessarily align. There's 94 categories in California, 60-ish categories in Colorado and in Oregon, and it doesn't always line up. It is challenging, and I appreciate CAA's efforts to try to harmonize that as much as they can within, the confines of the legislation. But I think there's, we look forward to continuing to work with our trade associations and the Producer Responsibility Organization to try to harmonize as much as possible and facilitate sort of easier compliance with some of these regulations. So that's all I have. Thank you.
All right. So I think the first thing we wanted to transition into was just talking about, maybe just high level. Paul, can you offer any examples of how to recycle has looked at the ReMA's ISRI specs for determining whether or not a product can get the label that they're gunning for?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about how to recycle, and it's a voluntary system that was built around initially the green guides and now is being influenced by new policy at the state level that is adding definition where definition didn't exist before. So we have what we call a decision matrix. So members like Reynolds would put in and enter their specifications for a form of packaging, and there's different criteria that we start to look at. So we think of ReMA and ISRI, and what they've done for a very long time is really looking at like bale specs and how we're going to have something that is classified as a bale and where it goes next in the process. Because when you start to do your breakdown based on data, you have to be able to somehow quantify it and then substantiate it. So we have a number of different groups that provide bale specs. The ReMA ISRI group has, for as long as I've been doing it, been the go-to for that type of a specification. So we will use their definitions in our matrix when we make decisions. It's not the only data point. We have multiple data points that come in. Our goal is always to have well-substantiated and understood third parties who know what they're doing, like ReMA does, to be able to pull from. What we probably need in the future is what I always say is when you know better, do better. It served us for a very long time the way it was written. Because of the new policies, we probably need to add some meat on the bone and define those bale specs a little differently. And that's part of why I was excited to come to this convention to talk through with the group, like how do they see the mechanisms to move forward to redefine maybe some of the bale specs.
Mm-hmm. And when, like, if there's an item that's not explicitly listed as being allowable within the bale specs, I think that that's been one thing where, again, as like a company like WM, their guidelines, we kind of look at it, but it's not, the gospel. And so we know with our relationship with our end markets that like there's some materials that are allowable, even if it's not clearly articulated. So like, how do you navigate a gray area like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And so the way specifically California will be determined, and this is again, reading a headline, this isn't my opinion, is through litigation. Mm-hmm. So they've said like, this is the next stage. So if, in service to the brands that are members of How to Recycle, it doesn't matter what Paul likes, right? It matters like, can we point to something and make it more black and white so that when we make a determination on what voluntary disposal label they get, if there is litigation for a brand, we have a clear indicator. I understand that the realities on the ground of what goes in a bale and how it's defined and the regionality and all of that, we get all that. Turns out a state AG does not care that much about that and wants you to pull out a data form that says, why did you give them this label? Mm-hmm. And so from that standpoint, we have to take a more conservative stance on whether we call something widely recyclable or check locally, because the work hasn't been done at a level yet to substantiate a different label. And that, I think, is what we were talking about, what you were mentioning with data points. Like, mm-hmm. The data, and I think the good work that ReMA is doing is to continue to strengthen through their working groups and their committees how we're going to push that forward. But the laws are here today. So right now, the determinations are being made on that. Again, I don't think if you sat in a room with people, they're like, of course we take a tube. Mm-hmm. We don't care that this is in it. If we can't pull a data point to prove that, when you're subpoenaed for it, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Yeah, it's just, wow.
I think Robin wants to jump.
Oh, yeah, okay, please, of course.
First of all, I want to thank the three of you for this great conversation. And I've got a couple of questions. First of all, on too.
Mm-hmm. Wait, he's going to come in and make sure you get a live mic. I don't want people to miss it.
We'll do it live.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Again, thank you very much for this. I really appreciate all three of you for this conversation. I'm embarrassed to ask the couple of questions I'm about to ask because I should know the answers. The data point on the tube. We have a fiber protocol that ReMA developed a couple of years ago, sort of the comparable to APR's plastic side. Mm-hmm. Has the tube gotten through the protocol? Because I would assume that would give the data point.
Is that the fiber readiness?
Yeah.
The fiber readiness tool?
Yeah. We have, ReMA developed a couple of years ago a tool to help determine whether or not fiber-based products can make their way through the system. And so it's called the fiber readiness tool. And I'm curious because I would think if you're looking for a data point, that may help you provide it. And I should know the answer if there are probably about 150 companies that have used it already, but I don't know who. I haven't seen the list.
We haven't, I guess, formally gone through the process.
It might be
I've poked around on the tool, and I think some of the questions I might need some help on the proper answer for.
Okay.
So
the other question.
I'll comment on that for a second too.
Before.
So part of why I'm here too is to say, how can we pull that tool into our world? So like with APR right now, we have a relationship where it's fully recognized. So if it comes in, what's happening specifically with fiber, and your team has been working with our paper collaborative at Brad to raise this up. It's these questions of additives. Like what is a glue and what does that do to fiber, and what percent of it is. And I currently not sure that the tool fully gives a report out that helps us with that.
Well, and that's useful information.
Yeah.
Because we do need to figure out how we align.
Yeah.
Because if it's the tool's not doing what it needs to do, we need to know that.
Yeah.
So great. Aluminum. Aluminum is becoming, and already has become a huge issue because the demand for aluminum is continuing to increase. And there's been lots of conversations around the country and around the world about how do we get all the aluminum we need. And a lot of the conversation has been focused on the UBCs, but you gave really compelling data with regard to the foil and cake pans and everything else. And I'll tell you, my own home, I am rapid about making sure that gets recycled.
thank you.
We do recycle in
Exactly.
yeah. I'm curious, again, ignorant questions, 2 questions about the aluminum. One is, why are some communities not accepting aluminum in their residential programs, and what can we do to help the foil? What can we do to help improve that? Because I will tell you from ReMA's perspective, we'd love to work with Reynolds, with, SPC and others to get education out there about it, because aluminum is a critical issue these days. And we want to try to pull as much back in. And then my second question has to do with recycled content, but I'll focus.
So as I guess alluded to, there are a few obstacles that I think lead to foil not being as widely accepted. First is I think one, size and shape. Foil can be anything from a tiny little ball that you wrapped your sandwich in, or a Hershey Kiss wrapper, I guess would be maybe the smallest example, up to, a full-size catering tray. And so I think the sortation systems are designed to target cans, and things that are far outside of that format are maybe challenging to capture. Second piece, the potential for food contamination. That's a concern. I guess my counterpoint would be there's a lot of other food contact materials currently accepted. So foil is very cleanable. So, rinse and shake it off a little bit before you put it in the bin, I think is
So is it
our
an
advice.
education issue then?
Part of it's education. I think the third piece is, alloy compatibility. So the alloy we use in bakeware and in wrap is different than what's in foil. So if a MRF is collecting a UBC bale, foil is considered a contaminant in that bale. And they may not have the volume of other non-UBC formats to justify creating a secondary bale.
Good point.
Yeah.
So from a MRF perspective, if there's something we can be doing or should be doing from ReMA to help address this, we'd love to be able to do it because it's valuable material.
Yeah, I agree. And it's definitely, we've gotten questions about it before. And so I'm kind of curious. I don't know the answer offhand, but, I'm sort of curious to go back and look at, in the, Ontario, Canada facilities that we have for their EPR program, what we're doing with materials like that. Cause I just hadn't thought to ask yet, but that would be very interesting to see if we've figured out a solve or a fix for it and underneath that more robust EPR system.
And that may be an interesting conversation for our non-ferrous division along with our MRF committee to try to tackle this, and then working with our stakeholders, our partners and stakeholders. And then the last question, an ignorant question, for the aluminum foil that is not branded the 100% recycled, on average, what is the recycled content of aluminum foil?
It varies, as you can imagine. So we flex our percentage of recycled aluminum content depending on a lot of factors and market conditions being one of them. So that's why we don't necessarily claim it on package, because it does vary quite a bit.
Well, and the reason why I ask, and then I promise to sit down, is because one of the things that we've been doing at ReMA is to help elevate the story of recycling and the importance of recycling, is talking about the end markets and talk about where people find recycled material in everyday products. So this isn't just a one-off. It's not we created a new product in order to get rid of your materials, but that in your everyday materials, you need this recycled content for your products. So we've been trying to tell those stories, and it has been difficult to get some of these stories, which has been surprising to us. So to the extent you have it, we would love to push that information out there as much as possible.
No, absolutely. I think this, our procurement team is here, and they're very busy meeting with a lot of folks to try to source more recycled content for our production.
And the end market piece that you brought up, and CA's in the audience, but I won't point to them. The end market piece that you brought up, has become more and more critical. We did all the antitrust stuff at the beginning. We're under antitrust. So there are some interesting hurdles for us sometimes to get the data in a clean way that follows antitrust. But for the audience that doesn't recognize it, like, it's always been in the green guides. They talked about it on markets, but now it's being quantified in a way that's similarly to what I was saying earlier. If we can't really say, here's what a responsible market looks like, and quantify it, then we have to downgrade.
And it's, I know I promised to sit down, but it's related to the earlier question and the earlier issues about education, because if people don't know this is just part of the manufacturing cycle, they won't have confidence, and they don't think it's important to recycle in the first place. We need to tie it all together.
100%.
Sorry, I was trying to go back to the SB 343 slide, but I couldn't do it fast enough. I thought that this would be a good slide to show during that part of the conversation. Okay. So I'm just going to put us on a standard slide. Let's do a slide of our speakers. Yay.
Oh,
okay.
No one wants to see me twice.
Geez. Okay. I guess the next question, source reduction. So the California EPR law has a very strict, they have a source reduction requirement within the California law. And, so very high level, because I know that this is a tough topic, but like high level, Jessica, if you can kind of talk about how you're navigating that, and then we'll turn it over to Paul to kind of talk about like how do you comply with standards that may ultimately be in conflict with each other?
So I guess to give a little more context about the source reduction, California requires a 25% decrease in single-use plastic packaging and food service by 2032, both in weight and number of components. So it's not just making your plastic tray a little bit lighter. It has to be less plastic trays or less plastic components. And CalRecycle specifies 5 paths to that. So there's reuse refill. So moving from single-use systems to reusable systems. Elimination, meaning taking out plastic components or going package free. And of that 25%, 10% must be through the reuse refill or elimination pathways. I had to take notes on this because this is a lot.
Very complex.
Material substitution is the third path. So switching from plastic materials or materials with plastic components to non-plastic materials. And you can see that sort of reinforced with some of the fee rates shared. There's a big sort of underlying push to move from plastic to non-plastic. Maybe that's metal, maybe that's glass. Maybe it's paper, but it has to be paper without plastic components, so no coatings or additives or glues or tape. Then after material substitution, there's redesign or concentration. So going to similar function but fewer components, or think about maybe concentrate, so you're delivering the same functionality or performance of our product in a smaller package, or maybe it's bulk packaging. Instead of a package of 20 cups, we're going to sell a package of 40 cups or 100 cups in a larger, so in one bag. Then alternative compliance would be the last pathway where you could use PCR, but that's only up to 8%. So there's a bit of a choose your own adventure with all the different potential pathways. And that's something that we're, very much considering within our, product pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
How can we, we are a single-use plastics company, but we also, like I said, have a variety of materials. We have some fiber-based materials. We have, obviously aluminum, metal. So, we're considering, all those options, and it's difficult to evaluate some of these trade-offs without specific fee schedules, eco-modulation. What are the bonuses going to be? Would the bonus cover the cost of adding the PCR? Is it a wash? It's difficult to evaluate the value of some of these incentives without specific numbers behind it, because we are evaluating among a lot of different options. So that is a challenge, but we are, doing our best to prepare to, what would the options would cost once we do get what the values would be, to help us make some of those decisions once that information is available.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, these deadlines are happening. Any changes we make today, we won't benefit from in terms of fees until 2 years from now. So it's not, an immediate payback. All that to say, we're definitely getting our heads around it. I have frequent conversations with our product development teams, our innovation teams, on, how are we thinking about this? What would it take to be able to do X, Y, Z? But, we're sort of a little bit preparing for the unknown at this point.
So to take it to just like sort of a higher level, and this wasn't, I just kind of thought of this. Paul, would you be able to walk us through, just remind people, why is that source reduction requirement in there, and why is the California law, its pathway was so much more unique than some of the other states because of the ballot initiative?
Yeah, I don't think I'll weigh in on trying to read their minds of what they were thinking with that. That's a dangerous road. But what I would say about source reduction is a few things. When you think about outside of the policy, source reduction, and the pathways that you just walked through, whether brands were openly talking about it or not, many of them outside of this policy were already working on these projects. Because from a business standpoint, source reduction makes good business sense, right? Like when you look at your supply chain, you look at the weights that you're pushing through, and you look at how you're working through it, there were teams already working on this. It might not be in their goals, and more you will see it not in people's goals, because the atmosphere around talking about sustainability goals has shifted in the last few years, but they were working on these things. And so I think, when you look at what California is doing, so if you're in an organization and you had part of your sustainability goals or your R&D goals or your business goals to just lower costs, if you're already working on that, you now have a new tool or financial level in your toolbox based on this policy to say, hey, I brought this project to you the last 4 years and I thought it was a good idea, and I get there wasn't an ROI on it. There were, but you had asked me to come up with ideas, and my whole role was to show you how we could do this. Now there's a new counterpoint ROI piece to say, this could actually help us long-term on a policy. So what I say to members is, first off, you don't necessarily have to like it, but you have to work with it in a really business savvy, sensible way. So what are the projects that you would have done already that fit your brand and your culture, and focus on those in the short term first? So for instance, what Reynolds is working on is certainly probably not what Sephora is going to work on, is not what General Mills is probably working on. And then if you bring P&G in, that's not what they're working on. So if you think about the pathways that she just walked through, each one of those, for reuse for some of them, they already had reuse projects that had a 10-year path. Maybe that makes more sense. So like in the beauty industry, for instance, they have some issues with packaging because of the size of it.
Mhm.
It's so small, it doesn't go through the system, and then therefore it's not considered recyclable. So they have a very different challenge than Reynolds might have in some of their areas.
Mhm.
So the first thing I would say is, don't just look at the policy and say, we have to do this for policy. Say, who's my brand? Who's my consumer? What's the smart business play I probably should be doing anyway here?
Mhm.
Work there first. Because I think some of this in the next few years will shake out and we'll know more.
Mhm.
So you're not just sitting on your hands. You're working on things that are core to your business already. And then you're hearing these things. And then maybe you do the middle ground stuff. Okay, now we know more. The fee schedules are settling out. There's a real bonus here, or there isn't, like wherever that is. Now you can start to make some of those middle of the road determinations. R&D teams, they know how to do this. Like they have agile business plans where they run sprints. I can throw every word at you from the nomenclature. They know how to do this. It's not about the policy. Pull in different teams. They don't have to be sustainability people and use their talents.
That's such a positive, like that's such a refreshing way to look at it, because generally when we're talking about the source reduction requirements, it's just like terror, and just like so much fear. So I really
Fear doesn't help you.
Yeah, I've
Gotta balance
appreciate
it
that
out. You can't-
perspective.
Gotta have some hope.
I was gonna say, yeah, and I feel like I could use some of that internally. Like, hey, all these R&D projects that like everybody is working on, like this could be a great opportunity.
And they existed for years, right? They exist.
Mhm.
One example I use for how to recycle. So being old, I remember before there were nutritional facts panels, right? So a lot of you probably are like, what are you talking about? They always existed. They did not. And they were regulated and the industry lost their minds.
Mhm.
And it was hard. And you want to really get complicated? We took photography of art. There were not Mac computers, and you placed it to print your packaging. You did a separate print, and there's a plate. I'm an old print guy too. That's not what you want to know, but we made it through that. And now everyone sees nutritional facts panels and they're like, well, that always existed. Did not. Drug facts panels did not exist.
Mhm.
So we will figure this out, but it will be painful.
So I've got a couple more questions, but I want to make sure that folks in the audience have an opportunity to ask, any questions of any of our speakers, or maybe request clarification. I don't know what, it's up to you all. But I can keep going with questions if okay.
I think we have a live mic on this side.
Top mic.
Sounds like it. Yes. Kurt Wells with the Aluminum Association. Probably a question for Paul. Maybe if you could just dig into a little bit more about, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but about responsible end markets. And I guess the reason I think that's important is if you're a ReMA member, probably the part of EPR that's going to affect you the most is the responsible end market requirements in these different EPR legislations. Because when I look at it, it's really the first time that the government is inserting themselves between a buyer-seller relationship of this is what's coming out of the MRF, and here's a willing purchaser that wants to make it or wants to purchase it to then remelt it, reprocess it, whatever, to turn it into new products. But now the government is saying potentially certain criteria has to be met before that buyer-seller transaction can take place. So take it away.
Yeah. So I will say it was always in the green guides, but it wasn't defined, right? So from a standpoint of understanding an end market, the idea is that if you say something's recyclable, you're actually making it into something, not just in concept, but you can prove it. So for many years at the federal level, there was really no teeth to that, right? Like it was conceptual, and the way How to Recycle looked at it is we wanted proof of an end market, but there was no real teeth to enforcement. The FTC generally wasn't going to jump into that fight, maybe at a very high level. And so what I think happened at the state level is this whole recycling is real. And you see the campaign around recycling. Mm-hmm. There's been expose after expose after expose saying this material never really went into a new product.
Mhm.
So if you've seen the ones like where they put a Apple AirTag in and they follow it and it was supposed to go somewhere. And, we all know that the scientific study of those is not real. Like that's not a real long-term data point, but from a consumer perspective standpoint, they're powerful to talk through like, is industry just being deceptive when they say something is recyclable? And then take it beyond technical recyclability to we've put a label on saying it's recyclable, so therefore it has to be made into something. So the way How to Recycle is looking at it is when you know better, do better, and continuous improvement. We didn't have these definitions before with teeth. Oregon, I think, is the furthest ahead in this space, with CAA and jumping in to say, like, how do we define it? But frankly, how is it audited? Like from a chain of custody standpoint. So I don't know that we know all the answers to that yet, but I understand conceptually why they're taking it to this level. Because there's this loss of trust just overall that what we're saying is being recycled is. And so when you're doing it at the policy level and it's a constituent, it's such a different conversation, right? Like we're all in the world, so we can throw these terms back and forth. But when you're sitting with your constituents and they're saying to you, I think this is a lie. I put stuff in my bin. I don't believe it goes anywhere. That was really, I think, why that got pulled in so strongly.
Any other questions?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Morgan with Church and Dwight. I just have 2 questions for the group.
I can't give you a label on the spot. Just
A couple I needed. Thank you. First one is, I understand the value of the EPR fees, but what is stopping CPG companies from passing on those fees to their consumers? Okay, the value of the fees is to, incite change in packaging design. What's stopping the CPG companies from just adding those fees onto the cost of the item?
in my opinion, not much. Like, I think, the spirit of it, it's not supposed to be passed on. But like, again, it's state to state. So you can't say like, just in general, what is stopping them. So if the states put certain protections in and they're clear, I think you have more barriers to it being passed on. But, CPGs, I think like when you look at anything, there's been the overall tariff conversation that's been happening over the last year. Like, well, those won't be passed on. And then are we going to list everything? So I would say right now there is not clarity that they won't be passed on. Just my opinion from what I've seen.
I would just comment that that is also a topic of hot debate within the industry. There are like dueling reports, so one report will say the fees are absolutely going to be passed on. And then another report will say, well, there's no evidence for that. We looked at these different. So there's a lot of conversation around it and different perspectives.
Right. It'd probably be hard to do legislation to try and stop companies from doing that anyway. So thank you. And the second question is, where's the balance between finding ways to recycle things how they already are versus having producers change their packaging design to work with current recycling technology? Can you talk a little about that balance? Is recycling technology perfect? Can it be improved?
It is perfect.
Not perfect, can be improved.
I think it comes down to trade-offs of, depending on the application, there may be a substitute material that is more recyclable. We make cups out of polystyrene, make cups out of PET, make cups out of polypropylene. Polystyrene, recycling challenge, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one where, whether the fee schedules or other things might motivate us to change to another material. Aluminum foil, that's a little bit more tricky where, if I'm going to wrap some food and put it on a grill, we're talking about, flames. I'm not going to substitute paper or something else in that situation. So it really, I think, depends on the application and what materials are available.
Think of packaging jobs theory as well. Like, so we're talking about EPR for recycling. the flames on the grill, like now I'm even hungrier.
Sorry.
But like the flames on the grill is a great, like the purpose of that wasn't to recycle. The main purpose of that was to protect the food, put it on the grill, make it delicious so I can eat lunch, right? Like that's what we're hoping for. So packaging jobs theory for Church and Dwight, if you're making a pourable spout for a detergent that needs to do a certain amount to save water even, because you want to have a really specific dosage and it needs to get to A to B without poisoning a bunch of people and getting in around everything, that's the jobs theory of that package. Sustainability and end of life should have always been part of that, frankly. But it can't be counter to what that's asked to do. So certain packages will be easier to have trade-offs when you look at it through a jobs theory of packaging, because you'll say, this could work. But like, look at healthcare. Like, I don't necessarily want a huge trade-off before my surgery because the packaging is going to be stripped open. So I always bring it back to like the core business, bring it back to your business, fold this thinking into your everyday business thinking as one of the decisions. Don't look at it by itself.
Understood. Thank you for your time.
All right. I just realized that we're at time. Sorry. We're 1 minute over. My bad. So thank you all for being here, and please thank our speakers with me.